In the early months of 2025, a quiet crisis was unfolding across Africa's digital landscape. The continent, once hailed as the next frontier for innovation, fintech and e-commerce, was now being gripped by an invisible epidemic, a surge of cyberattacks so vast and coordinated that entire national networks were periodically brought to their knees. Behind the scenes, a sprawling underground economy had emerged, where data was traded like diamonds and stolen identities were the new gold. The headlines came fast, one after another. In Nigeria, a leading fintech startup lost in $1.4 billion overnight after hackers breached its payment gateway through a vulnerability in a third-party API. In Kenya, the national power grid experienced a 6-hour blackout traced back to a malware-laced firmware update pushed by unknown operators. In South Africa, the Reserve Bank confirmed that an attempted ransomware attack had targeted its secure interbank settlement platform. Each case was treated as an isolated incident, but cyber analysts knew better. The continent was under coordinated digital siege. The origins of this digital war stretched back years. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, cybercrime in Africa was mostly dismissed as petty scams, advance fee frauds, cloned social media accounts, or romantic deception known colloquially as Yahoo. But by 2023, that perception was dangerously outdated. What had once been the work of desperate individuals had evolved into a complex criminal ecosystem, structured, hierarchical, and frighteningly efficient. At the core of this transformation was a convergence of factors. Africa's rapid digital expansion had outpaced its security capacity. Millions came online through cheap smartphones and unreliable public Wi-Fi connections, while local businesses digitized their operations without proper cybersecurity frameworks. Governments pushed cashless economies and digital ID systems, inadvertently creating lucrative attack surfaces. Yet for most users, cybersecurity remained a distant concept, something for banks and IT firms to worry about, not ordinary people. The first real warning came from Ghana in mid-2024. The National Communications Authority reported a 400% spike in SIM swap frauds and identity theft cases targeting mobile money accounts. Investigations revealed that the attacks were not random. They were being orchestrated from data harvested through social media scraping and breached government databases. The perpetrators weren't amateurs. They were operating from professional workspaces equipped with servers, VPNs, and 24-hour support teams. By late 2024, INTERPOL's African Cybercrime desk began to piece together the bigger picture. What they discovered was staggering. Dozens of seemingly disconnected cyber incidents, ransomware attacks in Lagos, data breaches in Johannesburg, phishing campaigns in Nairobi, were all linked to a handful of transnational networks, headquartered in West Africa but operating globally. These weren't just hackers. They were cartels, digital syndicates that mirrored drug and human trafficking organizations in their organization, discipline, and profitability. The dark web became their marketplace, hidden behind encrypted browsers and untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. These groups sold stolen identities, hacked accounts, and proprietary data from African firms. A report from Chainalysis revealed that Africa's crypto-based illicit transactions surged to nearly $2.5 billion in 2024, much of it linked to ransomware payments and money laundering through decentralized exchanges. The same report noted that Nigeria and South Africa ranked among the top 10 countries globally for crypto-related fraud. It wasn't just individuals or small businesses being targeted anymore. Entire governments were under attack. In early 2025, the Nigerian Ministry of Finance's procurement system was infiltrated through a phishing campaign disguised as an internal memo. The breach exposed sensitive tenders, allowing criminals to manipulate contracts worth millions. In Kenya, hackers took control of a county hospital network and demanded $50,000 in Bitcoin to restore patient data. In Uganda, an online tax filing portal went offline for days, disrupting revenue collection nationwide. While authorities scrambled to respond, cybercriminals were evolving faster than the systems meant to stop them. Many of these actors operated under pseudonyms but lived openly, flaunting wealth on social media. Designer clothes, imported cars, luxury apartments, They saw themselves not as criminals but as entrepreneurs of a new digital order. And in a twisted way, they were right. In cities like Lagos, Accra, and Johannesburg, cybercrime had become a parallel economy, employing thousands in coding, data harvesting, money routing, and social engineering. By this time, analysts began referring to the crisis as Africa's digital underground, a sprawling, borderless network of hackers, fraudsters, coders, and launderers exploiting the continent's digital boom. According to a 2025 INTERPOL report, cybercrime was costing African economies over $4 billion annually, with Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya accounting for more than 60% of the total losses. But the real toll wasn't financial, it was psychological. Trust in online systems began to erode. Investors pulled out of tech startups. Ordinary users became paranoid about every link, every SMS, every email. The scale of the operations was stunning. In one bust conducted by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, in Abuja, agents discovered an entire floor of an office complex converted into a cyber operations hub. Inside were dozens of laptops, connected to high-speed fiber, crypto mining rigs, and walls covered in charts, mapping target organizations across Europe and Asia. The suspects, all under 30, had built custom phishing templates designed to mimic official government websites. Their monthly earnings reportedly exceeded $200 million. International law enforcement began to take notice. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, working with African agencies, launched coordinated sting operations targeting cross-border networks. In 2024 alone, the FBI's Operation Eagle Sweep led to the arrest of over 200 suspects across West Africa, many linked to business, email compromise BC scams that had siphoned billions from global corporations. Yet despite these arrests, the networks adapted, splintered, and regenerated, just like cartels in the drug trade. The rise of these digital syndicates was also a reflection of inequality. For many of the young people drawn into cybercrime, the legitimate tech industry was simply inaccessible. Unemployment remained high, and systemic corruption eroded trust in traditional paths to success. In online communities, cybercrime was glorified. Yahoo Boys were idolized as self-made millionaires who had beaten the system. Songs, memes, and slang normalized the culture, while the line between tech hustler and cybercriminal blurred dangerously. Meanwhile, a new generation of cybercrime organizations began adopting corporate structures. Internal hierarchies emerged, CEOs, HR departments, and even payroll systems. Specialized roles developed. Coders wrote malware, social engineers crafted phishing campaigns, and mules laundered proceeds through shell companies. Some networks even provided employee training sessions on avoiding digital footprints or negotiating ransomware payments. It was crime with a business plan. Governments tried to respond, but most lacked the resources or expertise to match the attackers' sophistication. African cybersecurity budgets remained underfunded, often less than 0.5% of total national expenditure. Outdated laws struggled to keep up with new forms of digital fraud, and corruption sometimes compromised investigations before they began. For cybercriminals, it was the perfect storm in a rapidly digitizing continent with minimal safeguards and maximum opportunity. By early 2025, the situation had reached a breaking point. A ransomware group known as Black Hydra launched simultaneous attacks on banks in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, encrypting thousands of servers and demanding millions in cryptocurrency. The attacks crippled online banking services for days and exposed the vulnerability of Africa's interconnected digital systems. Analysts described it as a continental cyber pandemic, one that could no longer be ignored. In the aftermath, a continental emergency summit was convened in Addis Ababa by the African Union. Ministers, security chiefs, and tech leaders gathered to confront what one delegate called the new war we can't see. The session revealed chilling intelligence. Multiple African governments were being infiltrated by coordinated hacker-for-hire groups linked to global syndicates in Eastern Europe and Asia. The digital underground wasn't just local anymore. It was part of a global criminal ecosystem. Experts warned that unless drastic action was taken, Africa risked becoming both the victim and the launchpad of global cybercrime. The continent's strategic value was undeniable. young, tech-savvy populations, expanding fintech systems, and growing data economies, all attractive to both legitimate investors and criminal enterprises. The difference between progress and collapse depended on who controlled the network. By mid-2025, the truth about Africa's cybercrime networks was no longer buried in the dark web. It had surfaced in headlines, in government memos, and in the uneasy conversations of corporate boardrooms. The myth of the lone Yahoo boy typing behind a cheap laptop in a noisy Lagos cafe had been shattered. What replaced it was something far more organized and alarming. Fully structured digital cartels running like corporations, complete with hierarchies, job titles, and multinational reach. The shift from small-scale fraud to cartel-level operations didn't happen overnight. It began years earlier, quietly and cleverly. As technology spread, a generation of self-taught programmers and system administrators emerged across the continent. Many were exceptionally talented, graduates of cyber cafes rather than universities, with few legitimate tech jobs available, and with global markets paying pennies for remote digital labor. These young experts discovered that crime paid faster and better. They didn't see themselves as thieves but as hackpreneurs. They treated cybercrime as a startup, investing in better hardware, encrypting communication, and hiring others with specialized skill sets. The internet became their territory, and digital platforms replaced street corners as zones of control. Soon, WhatsApp and Telegram channels transformed into virtual recruitment hubs where coders, data harvesters, and money launderers networked like professionals. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire, analysts began mapping out cyber structures that looked uncannily similar to organized crime syndicates. At the top sat the architect, the strategist who designed campaigns, purchased malware, and negotiated deals with foreign partners. Beneath them were the engineers, the technical backbone who created phishing kits, cloned websites, and breached corporate systems. Then came the runners, responsible for laundering money through cryptocurrency, exchanges, or via clean accounts abroad. Finally, there were the faces, social engineers and scammers trained to manipulate victims through voice charm or emotional bait. Each role was rewarded through a percentage of profits. Some operations even issued payslips and performance bonuses. Cybercrime as a service became an actual business model. With premium rates for certain attacks, clients could pay to access malware tools, data leaks, or hacked credentials without needing any technical expertise themselves. One of the most notorious examples of this evolution was uncovered in Lagos in late 2024. Investigators from Nigeria's EFCC discovered a network operating under the name the Syndicate. What shocked them wasn't the fraud itself, but the organization's structure, complete departments for logistics, customer support, and crypto management. The ringleaders operated like CEOs, hosting meetings in luxury apartments and keeping financial records on encrypted drives. When law enforcement raided their premises, they found employment contracts, weekly performance charts, and even HR memos reminding workers to maintain professionalism during online engagements. Meanwhile, the Yahoo Boys of old were becoming obsolete. The new wave of criminals had evolved into cyber cartels, disciplined, interconnected, and internationally linked. A report from INTERPOL's Africa Cybercrime division revealed that these cartels had diversified far beyond email scams. They now ran ransomware campaigns, identity theft operations, and large-scale crypto fraud schemes. The most successful groups expanded into data trafficking, selling stolen health records and financial information from African citizens to brokers in Europe and Asia. The shift was also cultural. In Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi, the digital underworld adopted a corporate language. They spoke of targets as clients and scams as projects and victims as leads. They scheduled Zoom meetings, shared spreadsheets, and operated 24-hour help desks for recovering compromised accounts. On social media, they flaunted success in music videos and podcasts, presenting themselves as self-made digital moguls rather than criminals. International law enforcement agencies soon realized these groups were harder to dismantle than traditional gangs. They had no fixed headquarters, operated entirely through encrypted communication, and moved money faster than police could trace it. Even when a cell was dismantled, others filled the gap within days. Their adaptability mirrored the evolution of cartels in Latin America decades earlier, decentralized, profit-driven, and politically agile. In early 2025, the Cambridge Cyber Threat Observatory released a report that sent shockwaves through the global cybersecurity community. It revealed that one of the world's largest phishing networks was being coordinated from 3 African cities: Lagos, Cape Town, and Nairobi, all working under the same operational model. The network had compromised more than 120,000 corporate accounts worldwide, siphoning millions through invoice fraud and investment scams. The operation used legitimate digital marketing firms as cover, blending crime with commerce so effectively that few noticed until it was too late. Further investigations uncovered how these African cyber cartels had international partners. Some had ties with Eastern European ransomware collectives that supplied malware for a share of the profits. Others partnered with Asian crypto cleaners, companies that specialized in washing illicit funds through online gambling sites and peer-to-peer transactions. The dark web served as a global marketplace connecting these worlds. Within private forums, African hackers were no longer seen as small players, but as equal partners, valued for their creativity and ability to exploit unregulated digital markets. The use of cryptocurrency accelerated this expansion. Bitcoin, Monero, and USDT became the lifeblood of their operations, allowing instant cross-border payments. Some cartels built in-house crypto exchanges where laundered funds were converted into stablecoins before being funneled into legitimate businesses, real estate, music production, or even fintech startups. The irony was striking. Crime was fueling parts of Africa's visible digital economy. To understand the reach of these cartels, investigators began following the money. In 2024, a task force in Ghana traced several suspicious Bitcoin wallets linked to a charity organization that claimed to fund youth empowerment. The charity's account had received over $10 million in crypto within a year, none of it from donations. Instead, it was a laundering front for a multi-country business email compromise ring that targeted import-export companies across Europe. Each transfer was fragmented across hundreds of wallets, making forensic recovery almost impossible. While many citizens viewed cybercrime as a remote issue, its influence began shaping real politics. In some Nigerian and South African communities, cartel leaders became local power brokers. They financed community projects, sponsored artists, and donated to churches. They blended legitimacy with fear, presenting themselves as Robin Hood figures who brought foreign money home. The cultural narrative around cybercrime shifted dangerously from criminality to digital resistance against global inequality. These blurred moral lines became one of the greatest obstacles for law enforcement. Communities often refused to cooperate with investigators. In certain towns, raids by EFCC or local police triggered protests defending arrested suspects. The argument was always the same. They're not killing anyone and they're using brains. At the continental level, the African Union's Cybersecurity Coordination Center began classifying cybercrime as an economic and national security threat equal to terrorism. This recognition came after multiple countries, including Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, experienced attacks that temporarily crippled parts of their financial sectors. Yet despite this urgency, progress was slow. Governments struggled to retain cybersecurity experts, who were often recruited by private firms abroad. A brain drain from African cyber defense units left gaping holes in public protection. The cartels exploited these weaknesses ruthlessly. In a 2025 incident known internally as Operation Mirage, a cartel based in Benin managed to intercept a military procurement contract worth $3 million by spoofing official Defense Ministry emails. The transaction was rerouted to a Dubai account and converted into crypto within 48 hours. Despite international alerts, no recovery was possible. The sophistication shocked even seasoned investigators. These were no longer opportunists but professionals with strategic knowledge of governmental systems. At the same time, the rise of cyber mercenaries began reshaping Africa's digital underworld. These were freelance hackers for hire who sold their services to whoever could pay, politicians seeking to discredit opponents, corporations wanting insider data, or criminal groups outsourcing attacks. Many of these mercenaries operated from small hubs in Ghana, Senegal, and Rwanda, offering everything from social media sabotage to spyware installation. Their motto was simple: pay in crypto, no questions asked. By the close of 2025, the cyber cartels had become a parallel digital empire. They recruited university graduates, trained them in dark web tools, and indoctrinated them into a lifestyle where crime looked like innovation. Some networks ran internship programs under the guise of digital marketing firms. Seekers applied through LinkedIn, unaware they were joining a money laundering operation. Once inside, leaving became almost impossible. The risk of exposure, blackmail, or arrest was constant. Economists began warning of a deeper danger. As more young Africans entered these digital cartels, legitimate tech industries faced talent depletion. Cybersecurity firms struggled to compete with the high, untaxed incomes offered by underground networks. One Kenyan analyst described it as a talent inversion, where the most gifted coders, instead of protecting systems, were breaking them for profit. Despite mounting global pressure, the cartels continued to evolve. They decentralized further, shifting from large hubs to smaller, autonomous cells spread across cities. Each cell handled its own finances and operations, reducing vulnerability. This model mirrored that of modern terrorist organizations, where ideology was replaced with the pursuit of financial dominance. The new generation of cybercriminals saw themselves as disruptors of a global order that had long excluded them. By 2025, cybercrime across Africa had evolved into a science, a precise, data-driven enterprise built on manipulation, speed, and invisibility. What once began as crude 419 emails had transformed into a complex web of deception, powered by artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and psychological warfare. The continent's digital underworld had become a place where innovation thrived not for progress but for profit. The transformation didn't just happen in the shadows. It unfolded in plain sight, in internet cafes, co-working spaces, and even universities. The new generation of cybercriminals were no longer hiding behind fake email addresses alone. They had turned the entire digital ecosystem into a hunting ground. And unlike their predecessors, they weren't relying on luck or broken English. They were methodical, patient, and frighteningly strategic. The most notorious operators now used social engineering as their weapon of choice, not malware, not brute force attacks, but human psychology. They understood that technology wasn't the weakest link. People were. They studied how individuals think, react, and trust. They knew what kind of language triggered empathy, fear, or desire. Every message, photo, or video they sent was calibrated to elicit a specific human response. It was no longer fraud, and it was behavioral engineering. In Lagos, a syndicate uncovered in early 2025 revealed how refined these methods had become. The group employed university graduates in psychology and communications to craft messages that could manipulate victims from different cultures. They tested subject lines and emotional tones like marketers testing ad copy. When police raided their apartment, they found research documents analyzing the emotional triggers of victims in various time zones. The operation had generated more than $3 million in 6 months, not through hacking, but through precision persuasion. But social engineering was only the surface layer. Beneath it lay a digital infrastructure so advanced that even professional cybersecurity analysts were shocked by its sophistication. Networks used phishing-as-a-service kits, purchased from the dark web, which could automatically clone legitimate websites in minutes. These kits came with dashboards to track the number of victims, geographic reach, and financial returns, much like legal analytics tools used by marketing companies. By 2024, this model had become mainstream in criminal circles. Groups no longer needed technical geniuses. They could simply rent tools. Subscription packages existed for ransomware, credential theft, and credit card skimming. Prices ranged from $50 for small phishing kits to over $5,000 for premium ransomware bundles. The creators of these tools operated like legitimate SaaS, software as a service firms, offering customer support, tutorials, and even discount weekends. African syndicates thrived under this model. With limited risk and high reward, they could focus on scale. Instead of targeting hundreds of victims, they targeted tens of thousands. Their campaigns spanned continents Europe, North America, and the Middle East. One group based in Accra was found to have compromised corporate accounts in 16 countries using a single phishing tool that cost less than $300. As the cyber ecosystem expanded, collaboration replaced competition. The underworld began functioning like a tech industry with networking, outsourcing, and partnerships. Some cartels specialized in gathering personal data, others in laundering funds, and others in designing malware. A hacker in Nairobi could sell stolen data to a group in Lagos, who would then contract a team in Johannesburg to withdraw and clean the funds. Each role was distinct but interconnected, an underground economy worth billions. Technology itself became their greatest ally. Artificial intelligence and automation revolutionized how these operations ran. AI-generated content was now used to write perfect scam letters in any accent or dialect. Voice cloning tools allowed criminals to mimic victims' relatives, COs, or colleagues. Deepfake videos were used to verify meetings that never happened. Some attackers went so far as to create entire digital identities, complete with social media history, profile pictures, and LinkedIn activity, to build trust with targets. A well-documented case in early 2025 involved a South African logistics firm that transferred $12 million to what appeared to be a supplier's verified account. The fraudsters had cloned the supplier's emails and generated a deepfake voice call from the company's CFO to confirm the transaction. It took weeks before the firm realized the voice belonged to a synthetic AI clone. By then, the money had moved through 4 cryptocurrency wallets and disappeared into Monero. This sophistication blurred the line between cybercrime and cyber warfare. The same tools used by government intelligence agencies were now in the hands of criminals. Zero-day exploits, previously reserved for state operations, were traded on dark web forums for tens of thousands of dollars. Criminal groups purchased these exploits to penetrate vulnerable networks before patches were released. They didn't need armies, they had algorithms. Perhaps the most alarming evolution came from the hybridization of scams. No longer content with email fraud, cartels combined multiple attack vectors. A typical campaign might begin with a phishing email, continue with a WhatsApp message impersonating a bank officer, and end with malware that silently siphoned data from a phone. These multi-layered operations were designed to bypass even advanced security systems. In Ghana and Kenya, reports emerged of syndicates targeting government databases and tax portals. These groups weren't just stealing money, they were stealing identities. Thousands of citizens discovered their national IDs and biometric data had been sold online. In one case, a fake loan company used these stolen identities to take out microloans from multiple fintech platforms. The victims only learned of the crime after being contacted by debt collectors. Behind the scenes, the cybercriminal networks were supported by a growing dark web economy. The dark web had evolved from a hidden marketplace into a sprawling digital ecosystem. There, African hackers purchased stolen credit cards, malware updates, and leaked data from global breaches. Payment was always in cryptocurrency. Some groups even set up their own dark web stores, selling data stolen from local banks and telecoms to international buyers. The international nature of these transactions made prosecution nearly impossible. A fraud ring in Lagos might target a US firm, host its phishing servers in Romania, process payments through Malaysia, and cash out in Ghana. Each layer was designed to fragment jurisdiction and delay response. Even with international cooperation, tracing a transaction could take months, by which time the funds had already been converted into real estate or high-end vehicles. Cybercrime also began merging with traditional organized crime. In South Africa, authorities uncovered ties between cyber syndicates and drug trafficking rings. The cartels used online scams to launder money from narcotics sales. In Nigeria, several kidnapping groups used stolen SIM cards and hacked phones to coordinate ransoms and evade police surveillance. In some parts of the continent, cybercrime wasn't replacing crime, it was funding it. By 2025, business email, compromise (BEC), had become the most profitable cybercrime model in Africa. Unlike ransomware, BEC didn't require sophisticated coding, just intelligence, patience, and timing. Fraudsters infiltrated legitimate business communications, monitored email exchanges for weeks, and then inserted themselves at the perfect moment, often when invoices were due. They changed account numbers, cloned signatures, and waited. Once the payment cleared, they vanished. One of the biggest BEC cases in Recent memory involved a Nigerian-led syndicate that stole 11 million from a Dutch construction firm by impersonating an equipment supplier. The operation took 6 months to plan, involving more than 20 individuals across 4 countries. Only 3 were eventually caught. For every network dismantled, 3 new ones emerged. What made these cartels truly dangerous wasn't just their technical skill, it was their ability to blend in. They invested in public image. Some leaders posed as entrepreneurs and philanthropists, sponsoring local events and scholarships. Their social media pages were filled with motivational quotes and luxury lifestyles. They became influencers admired by the same youth they were recruiting. The cultural glamorization of cybercrime deepened. In music videos and podcasts, Yahoo life was portrayed as rebellion against poverty and inequality. Artists openly referenced online scamming in their lyrics, and fans saw it as a symbol of intelligence and hustle. The moral line blurred between ambition and exploitation. Governments launched campaigns to discourage youth participation, but the allure of fast money outpaced warnings. At the heart of these operations were tools, cheap, accessible, and devastatingly effective. Basic phishing kits could be downloaded from Telegram. Keyloggers that recorded every keystroke cost less than $20. Hacking tutorials were freely available on YouTube. AI chatbots could generate persuasive scripts for romance scams. The barrier to entry had collapsed, opening the door to anyone with an internet connection and desperation. In East Africa, another trend was emerging: cyber extortion and ransomware. Hospitals, schools, and small businesses became prime targets. In Kenya, a private hospital was forced to shut down for 4 days after attackers encrypted patient data and demanded $500,000 in Bitcoin. In South Africa, a major insurance firm suffered a breach that exposed customer records across multiple provinces. The attackers posted a countdown timer online, threatening to release data unless paid in cryptocurrency. These incidents weren't isolated. They were symptoms of a growing epidemic. The sophistication of ransomware gangs often outpaced government response. Many victims paid quietly to avoid reputational damage. Others lacked the cybersecurity infrastructure to recover. Some governments, like Nigeria's and Kenya's, introduced new national cyber emergency teams, but resources were stretched thin. Each month brought new victims and new innovations in the criminal toolkit. Meanwhile, cryptocurrency laundering became the lifeblood of cybercrime. Cartels used a combination of peer-to-peer platforms, online gambling sites, and decentralized exchanges to clean funds. They exploited weak know-your-customer (KYC) regulations and anonymity tools. A single Bitcoin transaction could pass through hundreds of wallets in under an hour. Chain hopping, the practice of converting between cryptocurrencies, became standard practice. Investigators quickly realized that traditional financial surveillance no longer worked. Unlike bank accounts, crypto transactions left no paper trail and could move across borders instantly. This anonymity fueled a surge in underground crypto investment groups run by cybercriminals. These groups promised high returns to investors, who unknowingly helped launder stolen funds. It was digital money laundering disguised as opportunity. By 2025, cybercrime was no longer just about theft. It was about control. Cartels began infiltrating political campaigns, manipulating online narratives, and selling access to hacked databases. Some offered espionage services to corporations or rival politicians. They sold data on opponents, leaked emails, and spread misinformation to sway elections. The same tactics once used to steal money were now being weaponized to influence power. Across Africa, cybersecurity experts warned of a potential collapse in digital trust. If people could no longer believe what they saw online, if every message could be faked and every video manipulated, what would truth mean in the digital age? The cyber cartels had created not just financial chaos but informational warfare. Their tactics revealed a grim paradox in the very technology meant to empower. Africa's youth was being weaponized against its future. Each phishing link, each scam, each ransomware attack eroded public confidence in the digital revolution that had once promised progress. By the close of 2025, the tactics of the trade had achieved terrifying precision. The line between legitimate digital enterprise and organized cybercrime had nearly vanished. To the untrained eye, a cyber cartel's operations could resemble a startup, its offices indistinguishable from a tech hub. Yet behind the glowing monitors and crypto dashboards lay the architecture of a silent war, one that no border could contain. The next frontier wasn't just defense. It was survival in a digital age where crime had learned to code, automate, and disappear. By mid-2025, the consequences of Africa's cybercrime wave were no longer confined to balance sheets or server logs. They had seeped into everyday life, into families, reputations, and entire communities. Behind every stolen password or hacked account was a person whose trust had been shattered, whose identity had been sold, or whose future had been rewritten by a faceless stranger. The statistics were staggering, yet beyond the numbers lay a quieter devastation. Parents losing savings meant for school fees, students trapped in online blackmail schemes, small businesses bankrupted overnight. What began as a digital hustle had turned into a human tragedy. The victims came from every class and continent. A widowed teacher in Kenya, convinced she'd found love online, sent her entire pension to a man posing as a UN engineer. Logistics manager in the UK wired $200,000 to what he thought was a legitimate African supplier. A small tech firm in Ghana closed permanently after a ransomware attack locked all its data. For every scam exposed, a dozen more went unreported, victims silenced by shame or fear of ridicule. For governments, the challenge wasn't just financial loss, it was public trust. People no longer believed in digital systems. Bank customers feared mobile apps. Entrepreneurs hesitated to expand online. The same technology that had promised Africa a seat in the global digital economy was now being viewed with suspicion. In Nigeria, data from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, showed a 38% increase in reported cyber-related complaints in 2025. Yet, investigators admitted that the real figures were far higher. Most victims never came forward. Many believed reporting was useless, that their money, now converted to cryptocurrency, was gone forever. The police lacked both the technical expertise and the jurisdiction to follow the money trail beyond national borders. At the heart of this crisis were ordinary families. Some discovered that their own children were part of the problem. In cities like Benin, Port Harcourt, and Accra, entire neighborhoods were being quietly reshaped by the proceeds of online fraud. Expensive cars appeared overnight. Luxurious apartments sprang up beside dilapidated homes. Parents asked few questions. Neighbors whispered but said nothing. In these areas, cyber hustle had become a generational phenomenon, a way out of poverty, when every legal route seemed blocked. But for every young man who succeeded, dozens were caught, imprisoned, or worse. The justice system was inconsistent. Some offenders faced years in overcrowded prisons. Others walked free after bribes or political intervention. The result was a dangerous paradox. Cybercrime was risky but survivable, and that made it appealing. The psychological impact was equally profound. Victims often described the experience as a kind of emotional violence. Many had trusted their attackers deeply. Lovers, business partners, even fake charity representatives. When the truth surfaced, it wasn't just their money that was gone. It was their faith in people. Psychologists began documenting what they called digital trauma syndrome, a lingering fear of online communication after being deceived or extorted. Some of the most disturbing cases came from sextortion, a rapidly spreading form of digital blackmail. Across Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, teenagers were being lured into sharing explicit photos or videos, then threatened with public exposure unless they paid. In March 2025, a 19-year-old university student in Nairobi took her own life after weeks of threats from an anonymous extortionist. Her death sparked protests and national debate about online safety, but the perpetrator was never caught. The emotional fallout extended to families of the perpetrators as well. Parents spoke of sons who changed overnight, polite students who became secretive and distant, obsessed with new laptops and unexplained income. Churches held prayer sessions for lost youth. Communities oscillated between envy and moral panic. Social media fueled both, glorifying cybercriminals as modern Robin Hoods while condemning them as digital predators. The economic ripple effect was devastating. Cyberattacks cost African economies an estimated $4 billion annually by 2025, money that could have funded hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Small enterprises, often the backbone of local economies, were hit hardest. Many lacked cybersecurity measures or backup systems. When targeted, they lost everything: data, customers, and credibility. In Johannesburg, a family-owned import business folded after fraudsters impersonated their supplier and rerouted payments. The company's accounts were emptied. Its staff, 25 people, were laid off. The owner, a father of 3, told reporters that the hardest part wasn't the money. It was calling each employee to say he could no longer pay them. In Ghana, fintech companies reported a rise in identity theft involving national ID databases. Thousands of citizens discovered loans taken in their names. Some were blacklisted from financial systems, unable to access credit for years. The damage was permanent. A stolen digital identity was harder to recover than stolen cash. Meanwhile, across the continent, cybercrime task forces were overwhelmed. Officers trained in analog policing struggled in a world of encrypted data, and VPNs, international cooperation, helped little, as extradition processes lagged behind the speed of the crime. Criminals moved money across wallets in seconds, while police waited weeks for paperwork. Even when suspects were caught, evidence often evaporated in the cloud, inaccessible without cooperation from global tech firms. Amid the chaos, digital vigilantism began to rise. Frustrated victims took justice into their own hands, exposing alleged scammers online or setting up bait accounts to trap them. While some succeeded, others targeted innocent people, creating new cycles of harm. In one case in Accra, a group of victims falsely accused a student of being part of a cyber ring. The rumor spread on social media, destroying his reputation. He later fled the city, unable to find work or housing. The human cost wasn't measured only in money or arrests. It was visible in the loss of digital innocence. Once, the internet had represented freedom, a place where Africans could connect, learn, and build global businesses. Now it carried the scent of danger. Parents warned their children not to trust strangers online. Business owners scrutinized every email. Every link, every message, every transaction carried the question, is this real? Cultural trust, the invisible fabric that held digital life together by mob, was fraying. In villages with new internet connectivity, elders already viewed the digital world with suspicion. News of scams and arrests reinforced those fears. For many, cybercrime became proof that technology brought moral decay. The social stigma grew. Honest young people working remotely for international firms found themselves labeled Yahoo Boys or fraudsters, simply for earning money online. In schools, the damage took another form. Teachers reported students idolizing scammers for their wealth. Lessons on ethics were met with laughter. Some schools introduced digital morality classes in an attempt to counter the glamorization of cybercrime. Yet the problem wasn't moral alone. It was systemic. With unemployment rates high and opportunities scarce, online fraud seemed less like a crime and more like a survival tactic. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred. Some began as victims, later turning to fraud themselves out of bitterness or revenge. Psychologists called it cycle of deception, when those hurt by scams become scammers in search of justice or compensation. It was an endless loop, feeding the very machine that had destroyed them. Law enforcement agencies, under pressure, began collaborating with tech startups and ethical hackers. Together, they tracked digital footprints, traced wallets, and dismantled small networks. In one operation in Lagos, investigators traced hundreds of fake job websites to a single server cluster. The takedown led to the arrest of 8 suspects. But the celebration was short-lived. Within weeks, a new wave of scams emerged under different names, hosted on new servers. The cyber world was hydra-headed. Every time one network was cut off, 2 more appeared. The human cost wasn't only emotional or financial. It was spiritual. Communities once united by trust were now divided by suspicion. Relationships dissolved over money transfers and online accusations. The idea of honesty, and once central to African social identity, was being redefined by digital temptation. Even religious institutions weren't spared. Churches reported tithes paid with proceeds from scams, forcing moral debates over blessed money. By late 2025, the continent was at a crossroads. Governments were digitizing everything, from taxes to education, while cybercriminals expanded faster than the systems meant to contain them. Experts warned that without massive investment in cybersecurity and youth education, Africa risked becoming both the world's next tech powerhouse and its largest digital crime zone. The victims, the families, the societies, all bore the cost of a crime that left no fingerprints. Behind every stolen dollar was a broken trust. Behind every hacked system was a dream derailed. And behind every line of malicious code was a story of human desperation, proof that technology, without accountability, could turn progress into peril. The tragedy of 2025 wasn't only that cybercrime had evolved, it was that humanity had not. By late 2025, the cybercrime surge across Africa had reached a breaking point. What began as isolated arrests and scattered investigations was transforming into a continent-wide counteroffensive. Governments, once criticized for slow response and weak digital oversight, were now mobilizing forces, forming new alliances, and investing in advanced cyber defense infrastructure. But the fight was far from straightforward. The adversary was invisible, adaptive, and global. The turning point came in June 2025, when INTERPOL released a detailed report naming Africa as the fastest-growing cybercrime hub in the world. The document highlighted Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa as primary centers of activity, each with distinct operational patterns. In Nigeria, fraud networks were increasingly linked to international partners in Malaysia and the UAE. In Ghana, local syndicates specialized in romance scams and business email compromise. Kenya had seen a rise in ransomware targeting hospitals and government databases, while South Africa faced one of the continent's most sophisticated cyber extortion rings. The findings triggered a wave of coordinated operations across the continent. Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, intensified its raids. By August 2025, over 2,400 cybercrime suspects had been arrested in Lagos, Port Harcourt, and Benin City. These arrests weren't the usual random sweeps, they were surgical. Digital forensics teams traced crypto wallets, IP addresses, and mobile transaction histories before moving in. For the first time, investigators were acting on intelligence instead of hunches. The Ghana Police Cybercrime Unit followed suit, unveiling Operation Firewall, a 3-month sting that targeted cyber rings in Accra, Kumasi, and Takoradi. Working alongside Interpol and Europol, they dismantled networks linked to the 2024 business email scam that defrauded a German energy firm of $5.6 million. Evidence seized included laptops, Bitcoin mining rigs, and fake bank account credentials spanning multiple continents. For Ghanaian law enforcement, the operation marked a rare victory in a digital war that had long seemed unwinnable. In Kenya, the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DCI, launched its own crackdown after hospitals in Nairobi and Kisumu fell victim to ransomware attacks that paralyzed medical systems for days. The investigation led to the arrest of 3 university graduates believed to be behind the attacks. Their computers revealed malware, sourced from the dark web, tools originally developed by Russian and Eastern European hackers. The arrest shocked the nation, especially when it was revealed that the group had been hired by a rival private clinic to sabotage competitors. South Africa, Africa's most industrialized economy, had its own nightmare unfolding. In 2025, the TransUnion data breach resurfaced in public debate as new details emerged, showing how stolen identities were resold on encrypted chat groups. Thousands of citizens had loans, credit cards, and SIM cards registered under their names without consent. The Hawks, South Africa's Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, began a sweeping probe into local facilitators who had distributed that stolen data. One of the most prominent suspects was a 29-year-old IT consultant from Durban, accused of selling personal records to foreign buyers through Telegram. His arrest exposed an entire underground market that traded not in drugs or weapons, but in people's identities. The crackdown wasn't limited to law enforcement. Governments were quietly rewriting policies. In Nigeria, a new cybercrime amendment bill was introduced to impose stiffer penalties for digital offenses and mandate telecom providers to cooperate with investigations. The Central Bank of Nigeria tightened cryptocurrency exchange regulations, requiring platforms to submit Know Your Customer (KYC) data for every wallet transaction. Critics argued this infringed on privacy, but authorities insisted it was necessary to stem the flow of illicit funds. In Ghana, The Ministry of Communications launched a national digital awareness campaign titled Click Safe Ghana. Billboards, radio jingles, and online ads urged citizens to think twice before sharing personal data. Schools began incorporating cybersecurity lessons into computer studies, curricula, teaching children to recognize phishing scams before they became victims. Still, the crackdown revealed a deep irony. Many of the people being arrested weren't hardened criminals. They were graduates, coders, and unemployed youths who saw cybercrime as a career path. During an EFCC raid in Lagos, one suspect told reporters, "I didn't want to rob people with guns. I robbed them with code." His words went viral, symbolizing a generation caught between innovation and desperation. Behind the official success stories, the reality on the ground was more complex. Police stations weren't equipped to store digital evidence. Many lacked even stable internet connections. Investigators resorted to printing screenshots as evidence in court. Trials dragged on for years. In some cases, suspects were released due to procedural errors or missing digital chain of custody documentation. The legal framework simply hadn't evolved fast enough to match the technology of the crimes. Meanwhile, the cyber cartels evolved just as rapidly. To evade detection, they adopted encrypted communication tools, rotating SIM cards and using multi-hop VPNs that routed through 5 or 6 countries. Some even began employing AI-powered voice changers for scam calls, making it nearly impossible for victims to identify accents or dialects. The result was an arms race. Every enforcement breakthrough met with a new layer of criminal sophistication. Interpol's Africa Cyber Surge 2, launched in late 2025, became the largest multinational digital operation ever conducted on the continent. Over 40 countries participated, pooling data from financial institutions, internet service providers, and blockchain analytics firms. The results were staggering. 20,000 suspicious IP addresses linked to financial crimes were uncovered, and over $3 million in stolen funds were frozen in digital wallets. But even Interpol officials admitted privately that it was just a fraction of the total. Public reaction to the crackdown was divided. Some applauded the government's decisive actions, believing justice was finally catching up. Others saw it as political theater, arrests made for headlines, not reform. Human rights groups raised concerns about wrongful arrests and profiling. There were reports of police detaining young men simply for owning multiple laptops or using virtual private networks, assuming guilt by association. In Lagos, protests erupted after several tech freelancers were arrested during a sweep at a co-working hub. Many were legitimate software developers, not scammers. The hashtag #NotEveryTechBroIsYahoo trended for days, forcing the EFCC to release a statement promising to review procedures to avoid infringing on citizens' rights. The incident exposed a fragile line between cybersecurity enforcement and the suppression of digital entrepreneurship. Amid the chaos, private sector collaboration began changing the game. Tech giants like Google, Meta, and Binance partnered with African regulators to share intelligence and track stolen crypto. Google launched a regional cybersecurity accelerator program for African startups working on fraud prevention tools. In Nigeria and Kenya, local fintechs started developing AI-based fraud detection systems tailored to African banking habits, analyzing transaction patterns, slang, and regional spending behaviors. At the same time, traditional law enforcement training was being reimagined. In Pretoria, a pilot program trained South African police officers in blockchain forensics. In Lagos, EFCC recruits learned Python scripting and digital fingerprint tracing. The goal was to turn officers into cyber investigators, rather than analog enforcers in a digital age. For the first time, the system wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. Still, the war was far from over. The crackdown revealed that cybercrime wasn't just about greed, and it was about inequality. Behind every scammer's laptop was a young man or woman excluded from the legitimate tech economy. The line between innovation and illegality was razor thin. In some neighborhoods, it wasn't the most talented who succeeded, but the most ruthless. As one Ghanaian cybersecurity expert put it, "You can't arrest your way out of cybercrime. You have to outsmart it." This philosophy began shaping new strategies. Instead of merely pursuing offenders, governments started investing in prevention, digital education, youth employment, and startup incubation. The idea was simple: give the next generation a stake in the legal digital economy before the underground swallows them whole. In Nigeria, the EFCC launched a rehabilitation and reorientation initiative called Project Recode. Former cyber offenders were invited to participate in monitored cybersecurity apprenticeships, using their technical skills to protect rather than exploit. A few success stories emerged: young hackers who became ethical security consultants, though critics called it risky to train criminals to code better. By the end of 2025, a new equilibrium seemed to be forming. The digital underground hadn't vanished, but it was being hunted, mapped, and increasingly contained. For the first time, Africa's cybersecurity landscape had coherence, a sense of direction. But the price had been high. Thousands jailed, millions of dollars lost, and public trust hanging by a thread. The crackdown had revealed both the power and the fragility of Africa's digital revolution. It showed that the continent could fight back, but also that every technological step forward carried its own shadow. The challenge wasn't just to punish, it was to rebuild, to redefine what it meant to be digital, ethical, and African in a world where opportunity and exploitation lived in the same space. As one Kenyan analyst summarized it, this isn't just a war on cybercrime, it's a war for the soul of Africa's digital future. While governments and law enforcement agencies intensified their crackdowns, another front quietly opened in Africa's cyber battlefield: the grassroots. Away from the political speeches and international task forces, local innovators, ethical hackers, and small community initiatives began pushing back against cybercrime in their own ways. Their fight wasn't driven by law, but by necessity, a collective realization that if Africa didn't build its own defenses, no one else would. The movement began not in government offices, but in classrooms, internet cafes, and co-working hubs. In Lagos, a young cybersecurity researcher named Aisha Musa started hosting free weekend workshops for students under a community project called Code Safe Africa. The idea was simple: teach teenagers how to secure their devices, recognize phishing scams, and understand basic encryption. What started with just 6 students in 2024 had grown by mid-2025 into a network of over 5,000 young learners across Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya, supported by local sponsors and a handful of volunteer cybersecurity professionals. At the same time, in Nairobi, a group of tech graduates from Strathmore University launched a civic tech platform called Digital Shield, aimed at small businesses vulnerable to online fraud. They created a free toolkit that allowed users to scan websites for fake payment gateways and phishing pages. Within months, Digital Shield had flagged over 3,000 suspicious websites, many of which mimicked legitimate African e-commerce platforms. Their success drew attention from Kenya's ICT authority, which offered partial funding to expand their outreach. It was one of the first times a government body had partnered directly with a student-run cybersecurity initiative. In Accra, Ghana, local innovation hubs like iSpace and MEST began integrating cyber ethics modules into their tech incubation programs. Founders were now expected not just to design applications but to secure them. The shift came after several local fintech startups had been hacked, losing thousands of CDs and customer data. One founder described the new approach succinctly: in Africa, security used to be an afterthought. Now it's a survival strategy. But beyond the tech scene, the grassroots movement was deeply social. Religious leaders, school teachers, and market associations joined the conversation, warning communities about digital fraud. Churches in Ghana began organizing cyber awareness Sundays, while mosques in Nigeria ran short seminars on spotting investment scams. What might seem like small steps were, in truth, monumental, because they reached people who were typically left out of digital education: traders, elders, and rural families. In South Africa, where digital infrastructure was more advanced, community groups took a different approach. The Cape Town Cyberwatch, founded in 2025 by a group of ethical hackers and civic journalists, began publishing real-time alerts on social media about ongoing scams, fake loan offers, and cloned websites. Their Telegram channel gained over 200,000 subscribers within a year, effectively becoming a crowdsourced cybersecurity bulletin. Their investigations often predated official police warnings, proving that community vigilance could move faster than bureaucracy. Meanwhile, universities across Africa began nurturing a new generation of cybersecurity specialists. In Nigeria, Covenant University and Babcock University both launched dedicated cybersecurity degree programs. By 2025, the University of Cape Town introduced a postgraduate diploma focused on digital forensics. These academic moves were responses to market demand. Companies were desperate for cybersecurity talent, but they also reflected a broader cultural shift. Cybersecurity was no longer viewed as an elite or foreign discipline. It was an African skill, a survival tool, and increasingly a patriotic act. Yet for all these advances, the grassroots movement faced enormous challenges. Funding remained inconsistent. Internet access was still unreliable in large parts of the continent, and gender inequality persisted. Women made up less than 20% of Africa's cybersecurity workforce. Activists like Aisha Musa pushed hard to change that, creating WomenSec Africa, a mentorship network aimed at training 10,000 women in cybersecurity by 2030. In interviews, Musa often pointed out the irony. Women are often the targets of scams, romance scams, identity theft, but they're rarely the ones building the shields. That has to change. In Ghana and Nigeria, local media began taking an active role in exposing cybercrime narratives. Documentary series and podcasts like Scamland Africa and The Code, Heist featured real victims, ex-scammers, and cyber analysts sharing their experiences. These productions didn't just educate, they redefined how Africans talked about cybercrime. Instead of glamorizing the Yahoo boy lifestyle, they presented it as a national challenge that required empathy, discipline, and collective accountability. But the grassroots fight wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about resistance, building digital defenses from the ground up. In Kenya, the open-source community developed FireNet, a lightweight antivirus designed for low-end smartphones that dominate the African market. It could detect common malware used in WhatsApp forwarded scams and SMS phishing links. The app quickly went viral, amassing over 500,000 downloads across East Africa. Its developers, mostly under 25, became local heroes, proving that innovation could outsmart exploitation. In South Africa, ethical hackers began forming small independent collectives that specialized in white hat takedowns with reporting and disabling malicious sites before they could do harm. They operated in coordination with the South African Banking Risk Information Center, SABRIC, which tracked suspicious financial activity. The partnership was unconventional, a group of self-taught hackers assisting formal institutions, but it worked. Within 6 months, phishing-related losses in major banks dropped by 22%. Meanwhile, across the continent, cybercrime survivors began turning their pain into advocacy. Victims of scams formed online support groups, sharing experiences and warning others. A Lagos-based collective called We Were Scammed published a monthly bulletin profiling common fraud tactics, written in simple language for everyday users. In rural Kenya, women's cooperatives started pooling funds to hire local trainers to teach mobile banking safety. The movement had evolved beyond fear. It had become empowerment. Perhaps the most unexpected development came from former offenders. Some reformed Yahoo Boys began speaking publicly about their pasts, warning younger peers against following the same path. A notable figure, Chinedu Koder Eze, who once ran a small fraud syndicate in Enugu, became a cybersecurity consultant after completing an EFCC rehabilitation program. His story was featured on BBC Africa in late 2025 under the title From Hacker to Hero. He said during the interview, "We were smart, just misguided. If the system had given us a way to use those skills legally, we wouldn't have gone dark." The broader message was beginning to take hold. Communities across Africa were recognizing that cybercrime was not merely a law enforcement issue. It was social, economic, and cultural. The fight against it needed to be waged not just in courtrooms, but in classrooms, living rooms, and chat rooms. And the more people became aware, the harder it became for scammers to thrive. By late 2025, the results of these grassroots efforts were measurable. Phishing rates dropped in several regions. Reports of online scams to national hotlines increased, a sign that people were learning to recognize and report threats. Digital literacy workshops spread from cities into rural districts, often supported by NGOs like Paradigm Initiative and Africa CyberSafe Foundation. In Abuja, one major NGO-led initiative, SafeClick, partnered with Meta to distribute free cybersecurity posters in schools and community centers across 6 states. At a policy level, governments began to notice. The African Union endorsed a new digital resilience framework designed to connect these grassroots movements under a continental cybersecurity umbrella. The framework recognized local innovation as a critical part of Africa's cyber defense architecture, equal in importance to law enforcement and intelligence sharing. Yet despite progress, there was still an uneasy truth lingering beneath it all. Cybercrime was evolving faster than the systems trying to stop it. Every time communities adapted, criminals shifted tactics. AI-generated scams, deepfake identity theft, and crypto laundering continued to rise. Grassroots innovation was a lifeline, but it was swimming against a relentless tide. Still, hope remained. The change wasn't just technological, it was psychological. For the first time, ordinary Africans no longer saw themselves as helpless victims of cybercrime. They saw themselves as defenders. Whether through coding, teaching, advocacy, or simply vigilance, millions were taking ownership of the digital space they once feared. In the words of one Kenyan cyber activist, "We don't need to wait for Silicon Valley to protect us. Africa is learning to build its own firewall, one person at a time." And with that, the battle entered its next phase, not of fear but of empowerment. As 2026 approached, Africa's cyber resilience was no longer just a government mandate. It had become a people's movement. By the middle of 2025, it had become clear that Africa's cybercrime problem wasn't confined within the continent's borders. Behind the rising statistics and scattered arrests was a deeper, more interconnected reality, one that linked Lagos to London, Nairobi to New Delhi, and Johannesburg to Jakarta. Africa's cyber underground had merged with the global web of digital crime, transforming the continent from a target into a player on the world stage. At first glance, it seemed impossible. How could loosely organized groups of young hackers, operating from internet cafes or small apartments, influence international digital crime? But deeper investigation revealed a networked structure that mirrored the global economy itself, decentralized, borderless, and incredibly adaptive. In 2025, an INTERPOL cyber operations report exposed an alarming trend. Nearly 40% of phishing campaigns traced to Africa were using servers hosted abroad, often in Europe and Southeast Asia. This wasn't just opportunism, it was collaboration. African syndicates were renting infrastructure, purchasing stolen data, and sharing exploit kits through encrypted dark web marketplaces that spanned continents. In Nigeria, investigators from the EFCC, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, uncovered encrypted chat groups where West African hackers traded credentials, fake IDs, and social engineering scripts with contacts in Russia, Ukraine, and Malaysia. The conversations revealed a chilling reality. The Yahoo Boys had evolved far beyond email scams. They were now participants in a global cybercrime supply chain. The trade was brutally efficient. One group would specialize in harvesting personal data from compromised sites. Another would craft fake banking portals, and a third would handle the cash out, usually through cryptocurrency, mixers or mule accounts, spread across different countries. Each operation had a role, and each role had a price tag. In Ghana, a police cyber unit intercepted transactions linked to a network that laundered over 12 million in Bitcoin through Dubai-based exchanges. The mastermind wasn't a single hacker, but a coordinated team operating from 4 different time zones. They had accountants, coders, and even customer service operatives handling inquiries from buyers of stolen data. The digital underground had become globalized, and Africa was no longer just the back end. It was a hub. Meanwhile, North African cybercriminals were establishing partnerships in the Middle East and Southern Europe. Tunisian and Moroccan hackers, once known for small-scale web defacements, began collaborating with Eastern European ransomware crews. They exchanged tools and techniques, sometimes even splitting profits from corporate ransom deals. A Europol statement in late 2025 described one joint operation that brought together hackers from 3 continents, targeting logistics companies across the Mediterranean. The attack shut down shipping operations for 2 weeks and caused millions in losses. Traces of the malware led investigators to servers in Lagos, Casablanca, and Odessa. The pattern was unmistakable. Africa had become part of the global cybercrime ecosystem, and not as a passive participant, but as an equal partner in digital crime commerce. The dark web, once the preserve of Western and Eastern European syndicates, began to show new footprints: West African dialects, Swahili-coded handles and slang terms unique to the continent. Forums once dominated by Russian and English. Speakers now included traders from Accra, Nairobi, and Dar es Salaam. Many of them specialized in social engineering kits, pre-written scam scripts that could be localized for cultural context. A Kenyan user known only as ByteSaint reportedly developed a multilingual tool that could clone WhatsApp interfaces to mimic local bank alerts. Within months, the software was circulating through global dark web channels, used by fraudsters as far as Brazil and India. Cryptocurrency played a pivotal role in this globalization. Bitcoin, Monero, and newer privacy coins allowed seamless cross-border payments, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to trace funds. African groups became highly skilled in obfuscating digital transactions. A South African cyber analyst described it succinctly: "They don't move money anymore. They move math." Cryptocurrency trading platforms in Lagos, Accra, and Johannesburg saw massive surges in volume, much of it linked to anonymous accounts. By 2025, analysts estimated that 1 in every 10 crypto wallets created in sub-Saharan Africa had been associated with suspicious activity. Exchanges struggled to keep up with regulations, and the anonymity of decentralized finance became both a shield and a weapon. While African cybercriminals connected outward, international syndicates also began looking inward. Asia-based ransomware groups and Eastern European data brokers started outsourcing certain operations to African partners. Labor was cheap, internet penetration was improving, and law enforcement capacity was still developing. Africa became a testing ground for new attack methods, a digital proving field where tactics could be refined before being deployed globally. One stark example came from Uganda, where an international hacking group recruited local programmers under the guise of a remote coding internship. These young developers were unknowingly building modules for ransomware campaigns used in North America. The discovery, revealed in a joint report by Uganda's ICT Ministry and INTERPOL, underscored how easily the global web of cybercrime could entangle legitimate talent. At the same time, cyber mercenaries began to emerge, small freelance hackers offering their skills to the highest bidder. Regardless of ideology or geography, many operated independently, advertising their services on encrypted messaging apps, website takedowns, DDoS attacks, data recovery, or social media infiltration. Some offered full-service packages, complete with fake domains and laundering channels. Their prices ranged from $200 to $10,000 per job. This gig-style cybercrime economy blurred the line between local and international crime and commerce. However, not all global links were illicit. African cybersecurity experts also began to form alliances with international counterparts to counter the rising tide. Pan-African networks, like the Africa Cybersecurity Consortium, partnered with EU and US-based security firms to share intelligence. Joint task forces were launched, combining African forensic specialists with Western threat analysts to dismantle transnational cyber rings. In 2025, one such operation, codenamed Echo Grid, and led to the arrest of a syndicate spanning Nigeria, South Africa, and the Philippines. The group had stolen over $30 million through PC business email compromise schemes. What made the bust historic wasn't just the scale, but the coordination. For the first time, agencies across 3 continents shared live intelligence in real time, using encrypted data sharing systems built specifically for the operation. These collaborations marked a turning point. For years, African law enforcement had struggled to keep pace with global networks. But now, with improved technology and partnerships, the continent was not only defending itself, it was contributing to global cyber resilience. Still, the battle was asymmetric. For every syndicate dismantled, 2 more emerged. The digital underground was self-replicating. It thrived on instability, unemployment, and opportunity. As long as global demand for stolen data and digital extortion existed, Africa's role in the ecosystem would remain both crucial and complex. Analysts began describing the phenomenon as the globalization of cybercrime. Through the African Gateway, Africa's growing digital infrastructure, mobile banking, e-commerce, fintech, made it an attractive entry point for global hackers. The same innovations driving economic progress also opened new vulnerabilities. International cybercriminals exploited this, often using African digital platforms to mask attacks aimed at targets elsewhere. Yet even within this tangled web, there was an unexpected shift in perception. African cybersecurity leaders started reframing the narrative. Instead of being labeled a cybercrime continent, they positioned Africa as a cyber resilience frontier, a region learning to navigate and secure one of the world's fastest-growing digital economies. Conferences like Africa Cyber Defense Forum and Smart Africa Alliance summits in Kigali and Nairobi became key meeting points for global tech and security leaders. They discussed data sovereignty, AI threats, and regional intelligence sharing, not as a form of catching up, but as a statement of intent. By late 2025, Africa's digital landscape had become a paradox. It was both a battlefield and a beacon, home to some of the most aggressive cybercriminal networks and some of the most innovative defenders. Its hackers could cripple systems across the ocean, and its startups could design solutions that protect millions. The global web no longer flowed in one direction. Africa was shaping it, for better and for worse. And as 2026 approached, one truth became undeniable. The future of global cybersecurity could not be written without Africa. By late 2025, the fight against Africa's cybercrime epidemic had reached a crucial crossroads. Governments and tech companies were investing heavily in cybersecurity infrastructure, firewalls, encryption systems, and forensic labs, but experts soon realized that technology alone could not solve the problem. The weakest link wasn't the network or the hardware. It was the human being sitting in front of the screen. Cybercriminals thrived not just on code, but on confusion. They exploited human trust, ignorance, and fear. And nowhere was this more evident than across Africa's rapidly digitizing societies. Millions of new users had come online in the past decade, many through smartphones and mobile banking apps. Yet very few truly understood the risks that came with this newfound connectivity. Digital literacy was no longer a luxury. It had become a matter of national security. In Nigeria, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, began a nationwide awareness campaign under the slogan, "Think before you click." The initiative targeted secondary schools and universities, teaching young people how phishing works, how to identify fake websites, and how to secure their social media accounts. Reports showed that over 60% of cyber fraud victims in the country were under the age of 35, the same demographic driving Africa's digital revolution. In Kenya, the Communications Authority launched the Be Cyber Smart Africa program in partnership with Safaricom and Google. Radio stations across the country aired 60-second messages on safe digital habits, while community centers hosted free workshops on password hygiene and online privacy. Rural areas that had never received such training before were suddenly learning how to identify scams that could drain entire savings accounts with one click. But awareness wasn't just about avoiding scams. It was about empowering people to see themselves as the first line of defense, a human firewall. A report by the African Union's Cybersecurity Committee in early 2025 made a striking statement. Every citizen is now a cyber agent. Defense begins in the mind, not the machine. That report became the foundation for a wave of grassroots movements across the continent. In Ghana, university tech clubs began hosting hackathons focused on ethical hacking for good. Students competed to find vulnerabilities in dummy financial systems, not to exploit them, but to learn how to protect them. In South Africa, the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, DCDT, worked with local influencers and YouTubers to promote short, engaging videos on how to avoid online fraud. The message was clear. Cyber awareness had to be culturally relevant and emotionally resonant. It wasn't enough to publish technical guidelines in PDFs. People needed stories. Real, relatable stories. One of the most viral public campaigns came from Uganda, titled "My Auntie Lost It All." It told the true story of a retired nurse who lost her pension to an online investment scam. The campaign used short dramatized clips that were shared millions of times on WhatsApp and Facebook. The impact was immediate. The National Cyber Helpline reported a 35% increase in fraud reporting within 3 months. In Rwanda, a different approach took root. The government integrated digital literacy into the national school curriculum. Starting from primary level, children were taught the basics of online safety, from setting strong passwords to recognizing misinformation. By 2025, Rwanda had become one of the few African countries where cybersecurity education was mandatory in schools. Experts began referring to Rwanda as a cyber-resilient model state. Meanwhile, the private sector also joined the movement. Telecom companies, banks, and fintech startups realized that protecting their users meant protecting their business. They invested in public education campaigns, helplines, and automated fraud detection systems that alerted users in real time. In Nigeria, GT Bank introduced pop-up messages within its mobile app that warned customers if they were about to transfer money to accounts flagged for suspicious activity. By 2025, mobile network operators across West Africa began implementing smart filters that blocked known scam messages at the network level. While cybercriminals adapted quickly, the measures still reduced mass SMS fraud significantly. Despite progress, the road to widespread digital literacy remained uneven. In many rural communities, the concept of cybercrime still felt abstract. Internet access was often shared, passwords were reused, and basic safety principles were ignored. Scammers exploited this gap ruthlessly. They called themselves helpers, promising to assist people with bank transfers, SIM card registration, or scholarship forms, only to steal their information. A heartbreaking example came from northern Nigeria, where farmers using digital payment apps for fertilizer subsidies were defrauded of millions of naira. Most victims didn't even realize they had been hacked. They simply assumed the system failed. It was a stark reminder that technology without education can deepen inequality. Recognizing this, regional coalitions began promoting cyber inclusion. The African Union and Smart Africa Alliance jointly launched the Digital Literacy for All program in 2025, aiming to train 20 million citizens by 2030. The project targeted women, rural youth, and small business owners, the groups most vulnerable to online fraud. Meanwhile, countries like Ghana and Zambia introduced digital skills certifications recognized by employers, turning cybersecurity awareness into a career advantage rather than just a safety measure. Young people who once viewed hacking as a means of fast wealth began to see legitimate cybersecurity work as a respected profession. In Accra, 24-year-old software developer Michael Owusu became a symbol of this transformation. Once part of a cyberscam ring, he turned his life around after being exposed to a digital literacy workshop organized by the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications. He later joined a cybersecurity firm and began mentoring others on how to stay safe online. His story went viral, used in multiple anti-cybercrime campaigns across the region. But digital literacy wasn't only about protection from fraud. It was also about resilience against misinformation and manipulation. With elections approaching in several African nations, disinformation campaigns spread rapidly on social media. Fake political statements, doctored videos, and false donation links flooded platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and X. Governments, journalists, and civic tech groups began collaborating to train digital fact-checkers, volunteers, who verified viral content and educated communities. The Fact Check Africa network, based in Nairobi, grew from 200 members in 2020 to over 3,000 by 2025. Their work became crucial in countering online deception and reinforcing trust in information systems. The battle for cyber safety had clearly shifted from the underground to the public square. In South Africa, schools adopted an annual event known as Cyber Safety Week, where students simulated phishing attacks and competed to identify fake news stories. In Cameroon, youth groups toured villages performing short plays that dramatized online scams, merging technology education with traditional storytelling. Experts noted something profound. Africa was beginning to redefine cybersecurity as a cultural movement, not just a technical discipline. Still, challenges persisted. The sheer speed of digital change often outpaced public understanding. Deepfake scams, AI voice cloning, and crypto Ponzi schemes tested even the most informed users. Digital literacy programs struggled to keep up with the evolving threat landscape. A 2025 survey by the African Cybercrime Observatory found that 53% of respondents who had attended awareness workshops, still fell for at least one form of digital fraud within the following year. The problem wasn't ignorance, it was overconfidence. This realization shifted the focus of education again. From just knowing the risks to internalizing them, workshops began emphasizing psychological awareness, how scammers manipulate emotions, like fear, greed, and urgency. Experts coined a new term, emotional cybersecurity, by teaching people not just what to look for but how to react. Africa's digital defense became more human-centered. By the end of 2025, the phrase "the human firewall" had entered mainstream conversation. It appeared on billboards, news headlines, and school posters. The concept unified an entire continent under a shared understanding that the most powerful defense against cybercrime was not software but awareness. Africa's digital transformation was unstoppable, but for the first time, its people were learning to move with caution, not fear. From Lagos to Lusaka, Nairobi to Windhoek, millions were discovering that cybersecurity wasn't someone else's job. It was everyone's responsibility. As one Ugandan teacher put it during a televised interview, "We can't build walls high enough to keep hackers out, so we must build minds strong enough that they can't get in." That sentiment marked a turning point. The rise of Africa's human firewall wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a cultural awakening. And as global cyber threats grew more complex, the continent was proving that awareness, unity, and education could become the most powerful weapons in the digital age. By 2025, Africa had reached a critical inflection point in the digital war. The continent that once lagged behind in cybersecurity readiness was now becoming a central player in the global fight against online crime. Governments were no longer treating cybercrime as a fringe issue. It had become a national security priority. From Lagos to Pretoria, Accra to Nairobi, entire institutions were being built to defend Africa's growing digital economy. The shift didn't happen overnight. For years, law enforcement agencies struggled against sophisticated networks that operated across borders, using encrypted channels and cryptocurrencies to mask their activities. But as the attacks became more coordinated, so did the defense. In Nigeria, 2024 marked a major milestone. The National Cybersecurity Coordination Center, NCCC, under the Office of the National Security Advisor, was expanded and integrated with Interpol's African Cybercrime Operations Desk. This meant, for the first time, local cyber investigators could access real-time intelligence shared by dozens of countries. The move came after a series of devastating ransomware attacks that crippled several government websites and private banks in late 2023. One particular case in the Lagos tech breach and changed everything. Hackers had infiltrated a payment gateway used by over 60 e-commerce businesses, stealing data from nearly 200,000 customers. The incident sparked national outrage and forced lawmakers to accelerate long-delayed cyber laws. By early 2025, the Cybercrime, Prohibition, Prevention, etc. Amendment Bill was passed, expanding the legal framework to include cryptocurrency-related offenses, data privacy violations, and digital money laundering. This legal transformation was mirrored across the continent. South Africa, already home to one of Africa's most advanced cybersecurity ecosystems, took its efforts further. The South African Cybersecurity Hub, housed within the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, evolved from a coordination center into a proactive defense nerve center. Analysts worked 24 hours a day monitoring digital threats, issuing early warnings to corporations and citizens. Partnerships with the private sector became key. Telecom giants like MTN and Vodacom began sharing real-time threat intelligence with the government, creating a national cyber shield that protected millions of users. The South African Police Service, SAPS, also expanded its cybercrime unit, training officers in digital forensics and data recovery. In 2025, it partnered with INTERPOL to take down an online syndicate running a multi-million rand romance scam network that stretched across 5 provinces. The success of that operation showed that local enforcement could stand toe-to-toe with global cybercriminals. But perhaps the most significant progress was being made not in Africa's big economies, but in its rising digital hubs, places like Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, and Mauritius. In Ghana, the Cybersecurity Authority, CSA, had quietly become one of the most effective regulatory agencies on the continent. It introduced mandatory cybersecurity compliance for financial institutions, e-commerce platforms, and even schools. Any organization holding digital data was now required to report breaches within 72 hours in a measure modeled after the EU's GDPR. By mid-2025, over 700 Ghanaian companies had undergone security audits under the CSA's new National Cybersecurity Assessment Program. The results showed measurable progress. Phishing and SIM swap fraud incidents dropped by nearly 40% within a year. Meanwhile, Kenya positioned itself as East Africa's cyber intelligence leader. The National Computer and Cybercrimes Coordination Committee, NC4, became the country's main command post for digital defense. Its analysts worked alongside the Central Bank of Kenya, the Communications Authority, and global partners such as INTERPOL. Together, they dismantled several large-scale fraud operations, including one that had stolen millions through fake mobile money applications. Kenya also launched Project Nyota, a government initiative that deployed artificial intelligence to detect digital anomalies across its national financial system. The AI flagged suspicious transactions in real time, identifying patterns too complex for human analysts. Within months, the project prevented what would have been one of the largest crypto heists in East African history. But for all its successes, cyber defense in Africa wasn't only about technology or law enforcement. It was also about collaboration, and that collaboration began to take shape through regional alliances. The African Union, AU, and Smart Africa Alliance spearheaded continental-level coordination through the Malabo Convention on Cyber Security and Personal Data Protection. Signed by multiple countries but long delayed in ratification, the convention gained new momentum in 2025 as states began to recognize the cost of inaction. The agreement laid out frameworks for data sharing, cross-border investigations, and harmonized cyber laws. At the same time, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, launched its regional cybersecurity action plan, focusing on intelligence sharing between member states. This plan became critical after investigators discovered that many cyber attacks targeting banks and telecoms in Ghana, Nigeria, and Côte d'Ivoire were being orchestrated by the same transnational networks. These syndicates operated like digital cartels, with recruiters, launderers, coders, and field agents spread across borders. To counter them, West African governments began forming joint cyber task forces. One notable operation, codenamed Black Tide, took place in mid-2025 and involved collaboration between Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Senegalese authorities. The operation led to the arrest of 18 suspects accused of running a phishing network responsible for millions in international losses. In East Africa, Rwanda's National Cybersecurity Authority, NCSA, emerged as a model of state-level resilience. The country established a cyber fusion center that integrated threat data from public and private networks. The system's predictive analytics allowed the government to prevent more than 70 attempted attacks on public institutions in 2025 alone. Rwanda's model was later studied by Kenya and Uganda, who began building similar systems. Mauritius, on the other hand, evolved into a regional hub for digital forensics. Its Computer Emergency Response Team, CERTMU, became renowned for its swift incident response capabilities. When a global ransomware wave hit Africa in early 2025, CERTMU was among the first to decode the malicious payload and share decryption tools with neighboring countries. Its collaboration with the EU-funded AfricaCert project further strengthened the island nation's position as a cybersecurity training and response hub. At the continental level, INTERPOL's Africa Cybercrime Operations Desk, based in Singapore but linked to major African capitals, began yielding remarkable results. Between January and August 2025, coordinated operations across 25 countries led to the arrest of over 250 cybercriminals and the seizure of nearly $200 million in illicit assets. Many of these arrests were facilitated by intelligence provided by local African agencies. What made this shift extraordinary was the rise of homegrown expertise. A new generation of African cybersecurity professionals was emerging, analysts, forensic experts, ethical hackers, and cyber law specialists trained within the continent. Universities began offering advanced degrees in cyber intelligence. The University of Johannesburg, Kanust in Ghana, and Strathmore University in Kenya all launched full-fledged cybersecurity centers by 2025. In Nigeria, the National Information Technology Development Agency, NITDA, rolled out scholarships for cybersecurity certifications through international programs like CompTIA, Security Plus, CEH, and CISSP. Thousands of young Nigerians applied, signaling a new era of digital defense consciousness. Meanwhile, African startups also entered the arena. Companies like Cyberlink, Kenya, Defendtech, Nigeria, and HackShield, South Africa, began developing indigenous threat detection software tailored to local realities. These solutions often address challenges Western systems ignored, such as protecting mobile money platforms or detecting social engineering, patterns specific to African cultures. The rise of this local ecosystem was both symbolic and strategic. For years, Africa's cybersecurity had depended on imported tools. Now it was producing its own and exporting them. However, the battle was far from over. As defenses strengthened, so did the adversaries. The same AI tools being used by governments for detection were being weaponized by cybercriminals for deception. Deepfake voice fraud, synthetic identity theft, and automated phishing became increasingly common. To counter these threats, Africa turned to cyber diplomacy. The African Union Commission engaged in partnerships with the European Union, the United States Cyber Command, US Cybercom, and the United Kingdom's National Crime Agency, NCA. Joint training programs were launched for African cyber officers. In one notable 2025 initiative, Nigeria and the United States signed a cybersecurity cooperation framework, enabling direct intelligence exchange and joint investigations into global cyber syndicates. Public confidence began to recover. Digital systems that had once seemed fragile were now backed by visible action. Banks started publishing transparency reports, detailing their cybersecurity readiness. Governments released quarterly updates on digital incident responses. These measures built trust, and trust was the cornerstone of Africa's new cyber frontier. Still, the fight required balance. As states enhanced surveillance capabilities, privacy concerns grew. Civil society organizations warned of the dangers of digital authoritarianism, the use of cybersecurity laws to suppress dissent or monitor citizens. Debates raged in parliaments about how to protect both safety and freedom. In the digital realm, the answer, experts argued, lay in transparency, accountability, and collaboration. By late 2025, the phrase cyber defense rising had become more than a headline. It was a statement of identity. Africa was no longer a passive target. It was becoming a defender in the global cyber landscape. The transformation was clear in numbers. 40 African nations had established national CERTs or cyber emergency units. 25 had passed comprehensive cybercrime legislation aligned with AU standards. Over 100,000 cybersecurity professionals were either trained or certified within the continent since 2020. And most importantly, cooperation between nations had reduced major cross-border attacks by nearly 30% in 2025 compared to the year before. The digital underground that once thrived in secrecy was now being confronted by an organized, informed, and empowered defense network. Africa's cyber frontier was no longer open territory. It was guarded ground. As the continent looked toward 2026, a new challenge loomed, not only to defend against cybercriminals, but to build digital sovereignty, an Africa-led, Africa-secured digital future. And for the first time, the world was paying attention. By late 2025, the battle for Africa's digital future had shifted from survival to sovereignty. What began as an urgent reaction to the cybercrime epidemic and global exploitation had evolved into a continental awakening, a collective realization that Africa could no longer depend solely on foreign-built systems, software, and security frameworks to protect its data, economy, and people. The continent's digital sovereignty, the right to control its own digital infrastructure, data, and policies, was becoming the next frontier of independence. In 2024, a turning point arrived when several African governments, led by Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, jointly proposed the African Digital Sovereignty Accord (ADSA) at the African Union's Cyber Policy Summit in Addis Ababa. The document outlined a vision for Africa to own its data centers, regulate its cloud networks, and build local cybersecurity expertise. The driving principle was simple. Africa's digital destiny should not depend on servers in Europe or Silicon Valley. For decades, African user data, financial transactions, medical records, even social media behaviors, had been stored and analyzed abroad, giving foreign corporations vast insight into the continent's economic pulse.
ADSA aimed to change that by insisting that African data
should be housed within African borders. By early 2025, Nigeria had already begun constructing 2 state-owned hyperscale data centers, one in Lagos and another in Abuja, as part of a public-private collaboration involving Main One, Galaxy Backbone, and Huawei Technologies. Kenya followed with its own Digital Shield initiative, focusing on localized cloud services to host government databases. Rwanda, long admired for its tech-forward policies, became the first African country to launch a fully sovereign national cloud built entirely on open-source software. These efforts represented not just progress in cybersecurity, but a cultural shift, one that placed data control at the heart of national identity. Still, challenges loomed large. While African leaders were taking bold steps toward digital independence, the very global forces they were seeking to disengage from held enormous leverage. Most African economies relied heavily on foreign tech infrastructure. For instance, 85% of Africa's cloud services in 2024 were hosted by Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. These corporations had integrated themselves so deeply into Africa's banking, telecom, and public administration systems that a sudden disconnection could trigger widespread disruption. Thus, the road to sovereignty demanded strategic, gradual decoupling. South Africa, leading the charge in the South, pushed aggressively for a regional cybersecurity framework. In late 2024, its parliament approved the Cyber Sovereignty Protection Bill, mandating that any company operating in South Africa must store citizen data within the country's borders. The law also imposed transparency requirements for algorithms used in public digital services. This was particularly important in an era where artificial intelligence influenced everything, from credit scoring to policing. South Africa's Home Affairs Department, for example, had begun testing AI systems for border control and refugee screening. Civil society groups warned about algorithmic bias, while the government insisted on the need for efficiency. The new law required all such AI systems to be auditable, a move widely praised across the continent. Nigeria took a slightly different route. Rather than legislating first, it invested in human capital. The Cyberforce Academy, established in 2023 under the Ministry of Communications, became one of Africa's largest training grounds for ethical hackers and digital forensics experts. By mid-2025, it had produced over 3,000 certified cybersecurity professionals. These graduates were immediately deployed into Nigeria's financial institutions, police cyber units, and national defense networks. Their work significantly reduced cyber fraud incidents, which had cost the country billions in previous years. A Nigerian security expert famously said at a 2025 forum, "We don't just need to protect our systems, we need to protect our story." That sentiment resonated deeply with younger Africans, who viewed digital sovereignty not just as a security issue but as a moral right. Meanwhile, Ghana and Botswana championed data localization and blockchain accountability. Ghana's Trust Chain project, launched in collaboration with the University of Ghana and several private fintech startups, utilized blockchain technology to verify government transactions in real time, reducing corruption in procurement systems. By storing the blockchain ledger within Ghanaian servers, the government ensured data immutability without dependence on foreign validators. Botswana took the lead in digital ethics by establishing the continent's first cyber ethics tribunal, a semi-judicial body dedicated to investigating privacy violations, AI misuse, and online defamation cases. Across the continent, a new wave of African cybersecurity startups emerged, many founded by young engineers who once worked in the informal Yahoo ecosystem. Their transition from illicit hacking to ethical innovation symbolized a Generational shift. Companies like Defendly, Kenya, Cryptarmor, Nigeria, and ZuluGuard, South Africa, developed homegrown antivirus systems and firewall solutions, tailored to African infrastructures, which often lack the high-speed connectivity required by Western security products. These startups also introduced multilingual user interfaces offering cybersecurity training in Swahili, Yoruba, and Zulu to bridge the language barrier in digital literacy programs. At the diplomatic level, Africa's newfound focus on digital sovereignty began to reshape international relations. The United States, European Union, and China, each with vested interests in Africa's digital markets, responded differently. Washington expressed cautious support for Africa's data independence, but sought to maintain partnerships through cyber defense training programs. China, whose tech giants like Huawei and ZTE had helped build much of Africa's telecom backbone, saw an opportunity. In 2025, Beijing proposed the Digital Silk Road Africa Agreement, offering to co-develop sovereign networks using Chinese cloud systems hosted within African borders. Critics argued this was a form of tech dependency rebranded, but several governments signed on, viewing it as a necessary stepping stone toward full autonomy. Despite these alliances, Africa's internal cooperation proved even more transformative. The African Union's Cyber Defense Coordination Center, AUCDCC, headquartered in Addis Ababa, was operational by mid-2025. Its mission to monitor, respond to, and prevent large-scale cyber threats across member states. For the first time, African countries were sharing threat intelligence in real time, enabling a continent-wide early warning system against ransomware, data breaches, and digital espionage. The center's launch coincided with the foiling of a major cyber attack on Tanzania's national power grid in June 2025, an attack traced to a foreign-based criminal syndicate. Analysts praised the AUCDCC's swift response as proof that Africa's digital defense ecosystem was maturing. At the societal level, the concept of digital sovereignty began entering mainstream conversations. In Lagos, radio shows debated the ethics of data privacy, while Nairobi influencers popularized the hashtag #OwnYourData. Universities across Africa introduced compulsory digital citizenship courses, teaching students how to safeguard their online identities. Governments, meanwhile, grappled with the balance between security and surveillance. The temptation to weaponize digital control was ever present. In Ethiopia and Uganda, opposition groups accused their governments of using cyber sovereignty as an excuse to justify internet shutdowns during protests. This sparked an important debate within the African Union: how to ensure digital sovereignty doesn't become digital authoritarianism. By 2026, Africa's tech landscape had visibly changed. Local cloud providers were on the rise, processing an estimated 40% of Africa's total internet traffic, up from less than 10% in 2021. The Nairobi Cloud Exchange, modeled after Europe's Deceit, allowed African ISPs and governments to interconnect data traffic without routing through Europe or North America. This not only cut costs but also reduced exposure to external surveillance. It symbolized a subtle yet powerful reclaiming of digital space. Africa was no longer just a consumer of global technology. It was a participant in shaping its rules. In the financial world, digital sovereignty took the form of currency independence. With cyber attacks targeting central banks, several African nations accelerated their development of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Nigeria's Naira and Ghana's Deceit underwent major upgrades, improving security and interoperability. These systems now operated on hybrid blockchain models that allowed for both government control and privacy-preserving mechanisms. The African Development Bank provided funding for cross-border CBDC integration under the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, enabling secure, real-time digital trade among African countries without relying on the US dollar. However, sovereignty also came with new vulnerabilities. As Africa's digital independence grew, so did the interest of cyber mercenaries and state-sponsored hackers seeking to infiltrate its emerging systems. In September 2025, an attempted data breach targeting the AUCDCC exposed the extent of these external threats, investigators discovered sophisticated malware traced to a North African hacktivist group with alleged ties to European cybercrime networks. The incident sparked outrage but also demonstrated Africa's improved resilience within hours. AUCDCC analysts contained the breach, patched vulnerabilities, and publicly released a detailed postmortem report, something unthinkable a few years earlier when transparency was rare. Amidst these geopolitical complexities, a philosophical transformation was taking place. African leaders, scholars, and activists began redefining what sovereignty meant in the digital era. It was no longer just about territorial integrity, but informational integrity, the power to define how a nation's data is collected, stored, and used. Digital sovereignty became a modern echo of the post-colonial independence movement. In the 1960s, Africa fought for political freedom. In the 2020s, it was fighting for algorithmic freedom. By December 2025, a continental declaration known as the Lagos Digital Independence Charter was signed by 42 African states. The charter established guiding principles for fair data governance, ethical AI deployment, and public ownership of critical digital assets. It also recognized cybersecurity as a human right, declaring that every African had the right to digital safety, privacy, and freedom from cyber exploitation. This moment was hailed by the media as Africa's digital emancipation. Yet experts warned that independence was only the beginning. The infrastructure gap remained vast. Many rural areas still lacked reliable internet, and Africa's cybersecurity budgets were a fraction of what developed nations spent. Furthermore, while sovereignty protected against external domination, it also placed responsibility squarely on local governments. Corruption, mismanagement, and political interference could easily derail progress if unchecked. As 2026 approached, Africa stood at a crossroads. The continent had proven that it could build its own digital defenses and reclaim its data sovereignty. But the next phase would test whether these systems could remain transparent, inclusive, and resistant to political abuse. Civil society coalitions like Digital Rights Africa began demanding public oversight of state-run cyber programs, ensuring that digital power remained accountable to the people. They warned that a new kind of colonialism, one of algorithms and surveillance, could arise from within if vigilance waned. Still, optimism endured. Africa's youth, the same generation once stereotyped as cybercriminals or scam artists, had transformed into digital guardians. They were engineers, analysts, and innovators shaping a new technological identity for the continent. The transformation was both symbolic and structural. Where once stood the chaos of cybercrime, now stood a coordinated effort toward digital justice and empowerment. In the end, the story of Africa's digital sovereignty was not just about technology. It was about reclaiming agency in a connected world. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Cape Town to Accra, the message was clear. Africa would no longer be a passive node in the global web. It would be an architect of its digital destiny. And though the struggle was far from over, for the first time in history, the continent's future, its data, its code, its people belong to itself.
This is Whispers in Africa. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the true crime documentary. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on the notification bell icon, so you'll be notified when we upload a new video. You can also tell us what you think about this documentary in the comments section. I hope to see you in our next video. Bye.